Okay, so let's get started with the Users Workshop. Welcome. Today, we're going to be covering the following topics. We'll do this welcome as well as a few updates. We'll talk about the teacher review workshops that we are hosting or are being hosted at districts around the state. We'll talk a little bit about item writing for transportation systems. And we'll discuss the item writing virtual workshop process, which we debuted last year. Finally, we'll do a WebXam walkthrough, WebXam test activation walkthrough, and we'll also do a full walkthrough of the WebXam reports. During these sessions, you can ask questions in the chat, and we'll answer them in between each of the sections of the agenda. So before we really get going, I did just want to remind everyone that as started last year, WebXam is continuing to support same-year retakes with the help of our colleagues from the Ohio Department of Education. That policy allows graduating students to retake most WebXam tests once in their final school year. Now, the retake must be scheduled at least 30 days after the original assessment was performed. And I do want to remind you that field tests may not be retaken, and that's just due to the length of the tests and the fact that when the tests are taken, you may not know exactly how the student performed on those tests in relation to the performance standards. So let's talk briefly about the WebXam calendar. The winter pretesting window will be coming up starting on January 4th, 2022 through January 28th, 2022. The post-test window opened yesterday, though obviously most schools were not in session due to Columbus Day, but the post-testing window is open until June 3rd, 2022. Now this year, the health science pathways are in field testing. So those tests must be completed by April 22nd, 2022. Also, if you're using WebXam pretests for teacher effectiveness as part of OTAS 2.0, those post-tests must also be taken by April 22nd, 2022. And starting this year, roster uploads may be done at any time. That window does not close. So let's talk briefly about field testing this year for health sciences. The field tests are longer versions of the WebXam assessments for courses with newly modified course outlines. They're typically 90+ questions. So you'll want to begin planning now for additional time for your students to complete those assessments. Now, courses in field testing must deliver their end of course assessments by April. That's a mistype on my part there. It's actually April 22nd, 2022, so that the tests can be finished for scoring in times for can be finalized for scoring in time for graduation. Now, as I mentioned earlier, field tests may not be taken as part of the same year retake policy. Finally, the assessments being field tested do not have pretests, as you may have noticed already. And this year, again, the health science career field is in field testing. I want to specifically focus on subject code 072150, medical terminology. That's one of the health science courses with a WebXam assessment in field testing. I mentioned it specifically because this course is included in a lot of non-health science pathways, such as business and administrative services, agriculture, and law and public safety. If you have a program that includes a medical terminology course, please be aware that it's in field testing, so that test is longer and it closes earlier. I do see a question, so we'll answer that briefly. Is the PowerPoint available now? So the PowerPoint is not available, and the reason for that is rather than a full slideshow, there's a series that we've recorded a series of videos, and then we'll answer questions in between those videos. So the actual PowerPoint itself doesn't have a lot of information in it. This recording will be posted once it's available on YouTube and available from the link on our news site. So let's get started with the first of those videos I've just mentioned. This one is about teacher review workshops from Ruth Ann Falconer. So enjoy.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. I suspect many of you may be beginning teachers or have not had much experience with WebXam. I know from experience as a career tech teacher that when you're told you must administer the WebXam to your students, you may be a bit overwhelmed and unsure about what the test will be like. Of course, you want your students to do well. Today's session will help you understand the testing system better, but there is also another opportunity that will give you an idea of exactly what to expect: the teacher review workshops. But what are the teacher review workshops? Teacher review workshops provide career technical teachers an opportunity to review current tests and provide comments and suggestions. A teacher may review a test once per test life cycle. Test security is extremely important, so teachers must agree to, sign, and abide by a non-disclosure agreement. Reviews are held at OSU seat monthly and off-site at local districts upon request. Some teachers may be reluctant to participate in the review because they don't know what happens to the results once they take the test. If that's you, let me put your mind at ease. Teachers receive an overall score for each test reviewed. Questions answered incorrectly are listed along with the competency number from the course outline, but correct answers are not provided. Teachers have the option to email the results to themselves, but rest assured, no results are shared by seat with administrators or others. Of course, you can share your results if you wish. So how do the reviews work? On-site reviews are held at seat on OSU's campus. Due to COVID protocols, we are limiting participants to 20 per session. The cost is $50 per teacher for the workshop. Workshops are held in the morning or afternoon, beginning at 9 o'clock a.m. or 1 o'clock p.m. on the first Friday of each month. Here are the dates of the workshop currently scheduled, with more dates expected to be released for the first of the year. To register, go to review.webexam.org. Workshops are also held at local districts with seat staff coming to the district. The cost is negotiated with the district based on the number of participants and the costs incurred by our staff who is attending. The date and time are also negotiated, with workshops usually being held for 3 to 4 hour sessions on Mondays or Fridays. OSU and district COVID protocols are always followed. Teachers will use the district's computer. Holding reviews at the district helps to minimize the district's travel costs and allows for the possibility of larger numbers of teachers participating. COVID protocols permitting, of course. Presentations can also be more focused toward that district. But no matter if you participate at seat, on site, or at your district, I'm sure you will find the reviews will be tremendously helpful in your understanding of the web exam. Here are some websites where you can get some more information or to register for the reviews. We hope to see you at the workshop.
Okay, thank you, Ruth Ann. Are there any questions about the teacher review workshops? I'll just be looking at chat, and I'll tell you that we did host our first workshop, as Ruth Ann mentioned, on site on Friday, and it went very well. So we appreciate the participation of teachers and districts in this process. Okay, with that out of the way, the next thing we're going to be talking about is the item writing plan for this year for transportation systems.
Thank you for joining us today. My name is Angie Stansel, and I'm one of the recruiters for the assessment project. Today, I'd like to tell you about the item writing that we will be doing for 2021-2022. This year, we will be writing for the transportation systems career field, which would include air and ground transportation pathways. In those pathways would be courses such as automotive, truck, collision, aviation, as well as some new courses, such as unmanned aircraft systems. A few courses will be broken into two separate and distinct courses as per suggestions from teachers in the field. Item writing for this process will begin in mid-November. And if you have a teacher who would be interested in signing up, please have them visit go.osu.edu/ts-item-writing. One of the new things with regards to item writing this year is the fact that all of our workshops starting in November through the end of the item writing process will be virtual. Why are we going virtual with item writing? Because it actually benefits the SME. We started this process with health science last year, and we discovered that a lot of the SMEs prefer virtual item writing because it actually frees up their time, but still benefits their students as well as themselves. The virtual meetings are shorter, 2 hours at a time, and the coursework is spread out over 2 to 3 workshops per course. This means you don't have to travel, so your school doesn't need to find a substitute, which also means you don't have to plan lessons for a sub, and you don't fall behind in your curriculum planning. There's no travel, there's no leaving the classroom, so no changes to lesson plans, as I previously stated. The stipend is directly paid to the SME, since the meeting takes place after school hours. This is a great chance for you to still network, and you will still earn professional development credentials if they're applicable by your HR department. But instead of leaving your home, you spend 2 hours with us in Zoom and still get the work done. Thank you very much, and we're going to move on to the next presenter.
Okay, thank you, Angie. So that was a discussion of the item writing that we'll be doing for transportation systems this year, including that exciting unmanned flying objects thing for drones. I'm super excited about that. I'm hoping that I can participate in item writing myself so I can learn about that process. So next up, Sean Hickey. Well, I will pause for questions. If there are any questions about transportation item writing. Okay, I don't see too many questions, so we'll move on to the virtual item writing process. This is a presentation by Sean Hickey.
How are the WebXam assessments created? It all starts with determining the body of knowledge, the information the tests will be based on. This process begins with the Ohio Department of Education, working with secondary and post-secondary instructors, business and industry representatives, and the Ohio Department of Higher Education to create and finalize career field technical content standards. From these standards, individual outlines are created for each course, identifying the strands, outcomes, and competencies that will form the backbone for classroom instruction. Once a course outline has been finalized, the test blueprint is created in coordination with ODE, ODHE, and subject matter experts, including secondary and post-secondary instructors. Like the blueprint for a house, this document will guide the process of constructing the assessment, identifying the content from the course outline that is most essential to the course, and indicating how many items should be written to each outcome. This process usually occurs in 3 steps. First, the Ohio Department of Education identifies some of the must-have content from the course outline. This can include outcomes that closely align to key industry standards, or content identified by the Ohio Department of Higher Education that will allow students to get college credit for passing the course. Second, a blueprint survey is sent to instructors within the career field. This survey asks instructors to identify the most important outcomes from the course outline, those that are most central to the core concepts of the course. These 2 sources of information allow the WebXam psychometric team to develop a preliminary blueprint. The final step in the process occurs during item writing workshops, where a panel of subject matter experts, mostly composed of secondary and post-secondary instructors, reviews this preliminary blueprint, making adjustments as needed. Once the blueprint is finalized, the test items can be written. In a series of virtual item writing workshops, subject matter experts work with small group facilitators to create a bank of test items from which the final assessments will be created. Most of the items are written in a small group setting over multiple workshops. Some additional items are written as homework by the individual subject matter experts. Once the entire bank of items has been written, each item is reviewed in a large group format to ensure technical accuracy. Once all the test banks have been created and reviewed, each course goes through a process of validation and standard setting. In an in-person workshop, subject matter experts review each test item again, making judgments about the quality of the item, the importance of the content of the test item, and the expected student performance on the item. Those same subject matter experts, again, mostly made up of secondary and post-secondary instructors, then make bank-level judgments, which are used to set the passing score for each of the tests. In the school year following item writing, the test banks are then field tested with students. This student performance data will be used to help the WebXam psychometric team create 2 final test forms, a 40-item pre-test and a 40-item post-test. These tests will be available in the WebXam system in the following school year. Through this collaborative effort with the Ohio Department of Education, the Ohio Department of Higher Education, and subject matter experts throughout the state, the WebXam team creates new assessments for more than 30 courses each year.
Okay, thank you, Sean. If there are any questions about that item writing process, I'm happy to answer them, or we're happy to answer them. I will just note in that video, you did kind of see how many pathways that medical terminology test is in, and how important it is to make sure that you're prepared for field testing in programs that are aligned to those pathways and that include that course. So continuing on with the trend, talking about the blueprints, which are vital to understanding how the WebXam tests are made and what content they cover. Here is our lead research specialist. I think I have that title correct. Bridget McHugh, talking about how those blueprints are formed in a bit more detail.
Hi, my name is Dr. Bridget McHugh, and today I'm going to talk to you about blueprints, what they are, where they come from, why you should care about them. And once you care about them, I'm going to explain to you where you can find them. So before we get started, I just want to clarify like why I'm so gung-ho about blueprints. I basically specialize in how to measure job relevant skills. So the statistics and the planning that goes into how many items to create and which items are good items. That's my specialty. If you are curious, if you hadn't met me at one of these workshops, and that you'll understand what I mean by statistics as we get farther into this presentation. So first of all, what is a blueprint? A blueprint, it's a plan that guides the content of the test. So everyone here has probably heard about the blueprint for a house. When you get a blueprint for a house, it tells you how many square footage goes to the kitchen, the living room, the dining room, the bedrooms, all of different rooms in your house. It's pretty much the same thing with a blueprint for a bank or a test. What you're looking at are how many items are going to be written for each content standard. So it tells you how much of the test or how much of the bank is basically taken up by that content area, just in the same way you know how much of the house is taken up by the living room. And with this, we make sure that more important content areas have more test questions. So for example, you probably don't want your entire first floor to be your kitchen unless the kitchen is really, really important to whoever's living in that house. So that gives you an idea of what the plan is. Now you may be wondering, like, how do we create this plan? Like, what are the rooms in the house per se? And those are the content standards that are given to us by ODE. So we don't actually know, like, we don't actually have a decision or any kind of decision-making process for what the actual content standards are, but we then use information about the content standards to figure out how many questions we're going to write. So what is that blueprint doing? Well, whatever is important, it's based on information from subject matter experts, that's instructors, or occasionally people who are in the industry relevant to the course. Most of the time it's instructors though. And then this guides the item writing stage of test development. Again, item is basically the fancy way of saying question and test development land. Now it tells us how many items should be written for each outcome. A good point of distinction is we are doing this planning document, this blueprint, at the outcome level, not at the competency level. Remember, for your outline, you've got your strand at the top level. Your outcome is a little more specific than the strand. And then nested within each outcome, there are usually quite a few competencies. So we don't have importance information from SMEs on each competency. But what we do know is which outcome is more important. And then we write fewer test questions depending on that importance. And it's a scale. So it goes from not at all important all the way up to incredibly important for that course. And we also do give the item writers who come to the workshop a little bit of discretion on which competencies they will write for within that outcome. That said, we do have must-haves that also guide the blueprint. And we also tell those item writers, you have to write a certain number of questions to this competency because it is a must-have. And that is also dictated by ODE. So where does this blueprint actually come from? What we do is we send out a wonderful online survey that asks instructors what content standards are more important and easier to write questions to. And then we use these survey responses to make a bank blueprint before the item writing workshop. So these are basically ratings on a scale of 1 to 5. In terms of what guides how many items are written. Importance is the most critical part that really tends to guide mostly how we decide how many items to write. And then we do a little bit of an adjustment based on which questions are easier to write to. And I can get into the math if you're particularly curious, but there's basically going to be a percentage of the overall importance for the test for each outcome directly corresponds to the percentage of items that we are going to write. So that's proportional to what we see from the ratings. Now, that said, we do make small adjustments to this blueprint the day of the item writing workshop by getting feedback from SMEs that actually come to the workshop. And then once we have that little bit of tweaking, usually there's not a ton of debate, we then assign a set number of questions for each outcome that are written in those workshops and then finished up during homework. One thing to keep in mind, though, as you use this to guide your instruction, the bank blueprint is not a test blueprint. The bank refers to the questions that are available to use on the test. It's all the questions we wrote that were approved by the SMEs. It's about 100 test items. That means that we pick the best ones and we try to match it so that it looks like the bank when we include a subset of 40 items on each test form. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's exactly the same. That's different, and it's different than the composition of the bank. The percentages are different because we can't use all of the items. Part of that is because we only need 40 and we wrote 100. And then the other part is that some test questions get dropped. So not all items can be used. In addition, what sometimes happens is only 1% of the bank is ends up being like the number of items we have from that outcome, and then that partakes like one item is there basically, and then it might not be a very good item, and so we end up with no items from very much less important outcomes. In addition, we match the pre-test and the post-test for content. So sometimes by balancing having those forms matched, it's going to look a little different than the bank blueprints itself. And also just thinking, you know, in terms of actual math, going from 100 questions to 40 questions, the percentage is not going to be exactly the same. In addition, we really want to make sure that we're only including test questions that have really good quality. That's based on instructor ratings and item statistics. So it's not going to look exactly the same. Usually we try to match it so that's within 5%. So if you get the bank blueprint, which is available, and I'll show you where it is, it's going to be pretty close to the test. So getting more into why we don't include certain items, we always generate more items than are needed. It's generally a good idea to have more test questions because sometimes some test questions get exposed. Not all of them are going to be great. Sometimes test questions, they don't work well out in the field after a year or two for whatever reason, and we like to have a couple extra to switch them out. Now we know which test questions are good, not just because we get wonderful ratings of quality from our subject matter experts, instructors that come to our workshops. We also field test all of the items, and we get these wonderful statistics that tell us, you know, basically when an item's bad or when students are just missing the item at an unusually high or low rate. And then that tells us whether or not we should actually include the item. Now that you know what these blueprints are, though, I'm sure you are trying to figure out, how can I actually find these blueprints? We don't want you to be surprised by what is on this test that you are giving. So we like to give you an idea of how many questions we wrote for each outcome. And you can find that on the WebXam org website. So go to webexam.org. You'll probably have your computer right here with another tab you could use to look this up. Go to webexam.org, hit about the tests, and then the next menu, you can find your pathway for the test you are interested in, hit blueprints, and you will see them. Now, an explanation of what you are seeing. The blueprint is a table. So you'll have a table for each test. It is organized by strands. So again, in your outline, you have the strand, outcome, and then competency. Those are the 3 levels. And then you will see the percentage of items in the bank from each outcome. And it's based on all of the items that we have available to include on the forms. Now, this will kind of give you a better idea of what we mean when we explain that it's a table. This is what you're going to see. If you look, there's a little snip where we cut off the screenshot. So there's a lot more outcomes in this blueprint. In case you were curious why we left off at 3.3, and you were teaching this class, you can see the full blueprint on the website. And this will give you a better idea. Let's take a quick look. Cognitive growth and development looks like it has quite a few items. And you may be wondering, like, how do we decide that? Well, because it's more important. So you can see that makes sense. This is a class on child and adolescent development. So the more important outcome got more test questions. You can see the more general outcomes, like the ones that are more about, employability. That's things like knowing how to interview for a job. And then also just the general basic history and philosophy of education, you can see is a very small percentage of the bank compared to cognitive growth and development. Now you may be saying, hey, I don't know if I agree with how the blueprints look. How can I influence them when we are writing tests in the future? Well, guess what? If you are teaching transportation systems, we are making the blueprints this year because we are writing the questions this year. And you can be one of the SMEs that tells us which outcomes are more important for the course by taking a survey. The way you get the survey, we don't like to just send it out, the link out, because sometimes people will take it twice without realizing it. We also don't want people who are not instructors taking the survey, because sometimes that happens. So please email me. That is my email address, mchugh.159@osu.edu. Please, 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 if you are an instructor in transportation systems, this is the easiest way for you to influence what content is on the test. It really is. We look at all the data. You send us all the data from the survey. It'll take you 5 minutes per course. You don't even have to fill out all of your ratings in one sitting. If you click the link that I would email you, it will leave. You can leave off somewhere. It will pick up where you left off once you click on the link again. Just as long as you do it within about a week, it'll save your spot. If not, it does record it as a response, but it probably will not take you a week to finish. If you somehow started it and you didn't finish, just feel free to contact me too. I will send you a new link and you can retake it. Please, please fill out the survey if you're a transportation systems teacher. And if you have any other questions about the blueprint, you want to know the math behind it, you want to know the process, you want to have more questions about where you can find blueprints, please email me. I am happy to help.
I can confirm that Bridget will answer any question about statistics. I have asked her so many that she's a little weary of me asking those questions now. So it would be really helpful if someone else would ask her some questions. about that. And I do encourage you, if you have experience in transportation systems, or if you know somebody who has experience and expertise in transportation systems, to have them contact Bridget. Because the more information we have about which outcomes are important on these tests, the better the tests will be. Okay, now we are moving into the WebXam sort of overview part of this workshop. So that's going to start with the WebXam sort of walkthrough that I am doing. Now, these next three sections are, we're using our demonstration website, demo.webexam.org, to sort of live demonstrate how various features on the WebXam system work. And you're welcome, if you wish, and you don't have to do this, it's just an option that's available to you. You're welcome to follow along with what we're doing on that website as we're sort of doing it. And so to do that, you can go to the website demo.webexam.org, log in with the username users.workshop, and the password WebXam, all lowercase. And I do want to stress, if you're watching this as a recording later on after October 12th, that this option is not available to you. And again, it's completely optional. You don't have to do it. It's just if you're like me and you sort of learn by doing, this is an option that's available to you. Okay, so let's get started. This is going to be a general walkthrough of some important features in the WebXam system. Enjoy.
Hello, my name is Richard Huggins, and I'm pleased to be talking to you today, doing a WebXam walkthrough for the WebXam Users Workshop. Now, you're welcome to follow along with this walkthrough if you wish to by going to the website demo.webexam.org and logging in with a username users.workshop and a password of WebXam. You're not required to do this, and this option is only available during the WebXam User Workshop on October 12th, 2021. If you're watching this video later on, or would just prefer to sit back and watch the features, you're welcome to do that as well. So we're going to be covering 4 main areas within WebXam today. And these are areas where either there have been some changes recently, or that are very important to understanding how WebXam operates. So we'll be covering ordering pretests, managing student accounts, uploading students, and then finally we'll talk about managing the WebXam hierarchy. So for ordering tests, there are some new features. You can hold credits for later use in your administrative account. Secondly, there have been some improvements made to the reassign credit page. And last year, we added the option to pay by credit card if that's easier for you. So let's take a look. So I've logged into WebXam using that Users Workshop account now, and the ordering tests option is available. Now, ordering tests is only available to administrators and not to teachers. If you are a teacher and your school wishes you to administer your own program, please let us know and we can give you a second administrator account so that you may order tests if necessary. Now, tests only need to be ordered if you're delivering pretests. End of course assessments are at no cost and are covered by our contract with the Ohio Department of Education. However, if you're using WebXam pretests, you must order those tests in order to be able to deliver them. So to start a new order, under order tests, we select new order. So the first thing you'll note is that we give you information about how to make purchase orders. Purchase orders should be made payable to the Ohio State University, care of SEAT, the Center on Employment and Training for Education, which houses the WebXam platform. Our address is 1900 Kinney Road, Columbus, Ohio, 43210. Now, as you can see in the blue area, tests must be ordered if you're delivering pre-tests or if you're offering new employability tests. Now, 99 or maybe even 100% of our current ordering is pre-tests, so we'll be focusing on those. So to do a new order, you must complete all of this information. And the billing to and from should be a treasurer, typically, your school district, the school district address, city, state, zip, as well as a phone number to your treasurer's office. Your school's tax exemption number should be provided. Now, if you wish to pay by credit card, you'll simply check this box. However, if you're paying by purchase order, leave that box unchecked and complete the purchase order number field. Lastly, you can include some notes that may help if any issues arise later on. Now, as the last step in the process, you can choose which teachers to assign the credits you're purchasing to. So you can assign all of those teachers to your administrative, or all these credits to your administrative account for use later on. And what you'll notice that if we add, let's say 20 pre-testing credits, that costs $40. The cost of a WebXam pretest is $2 per test delivered. So let's say you have a class of 20 students and you want to deliver 2 different pretests to those students as part of your program. In that case, you're actually delivering 40 tests. So you should change your quantity to 40, and that will change the cost to $80. Now, as I said, you can either assign those to your administrative account so that you can later assign them to teachers, or you can assign them to teachers directly. And if you want to include multiple teachers on the same order, you can use the expand order option to do that. So we can select a different teacher, pretests, and another 40. You'll notice the total is updated as you type. So now this order, if we were to place it, would be for $160. These pre-testing credits are available once you place the order. You don't need to wait for us to process your purchase order or anything like that. The pre-tests are available immediately. Once you have completed the purchase order or completed the form, please email your purchase order to seat-receivables@osu.edu. Typically, billing occurs at the end of each month, but may occur a little later depending on how the process is going. Now, once you place an order, as I said, those credits are immediately available. But if you need to go back and review your orders, you can click on the View Orders button. And what you'll notice is two reports. The first one will detail what orders have been placed for what teachers. So you can see there was an order placed for Anderson Adams for 195 tests. 167 of those have been used. And they currently have 6 tests remaining. You might notice there's a discrepancy there, and that just might mean some of their tests have been later assigned to other teachers. Secondly, you can see an order history. This order history gives you an indication of what orders have been placed in the past, and you can expand those and see which teachers those orders were placed for. Now, sometimes you will place an order and then later need to move those credits to a different account. To do that, you use the Reassign Credits feature within WebXam. So if you have tests or credits that you've assigned to your administrator account, they will be listed here. Otherwise, for each teacher, you'll see their username, you'll see how many credits they currently have available and how many credits they've used. Now, if you wish to reassign this user's credits to another teacher, you can simply subtract the credits from their account and then add them to another teacher's account. And what you'll notice at the bottom of this page, once you look at all the teachers, is that this credits remaining is now 0 because we took away 7 and then added 7. And if we click the Save button, that will save those changes. And so you'll now see that this teacher has 0 credits available, and this teacher now has 7 credits available. If you attempt to reassign credits such that the number reassigned doesn't add up to 0, you'll see that this credits remaining is now -3, and the save option is disabled. Only when these numbers balance out and this is 0, can you save these changes. So that is how you can move credits amongst teachers as needed so that students can, or so that you can deliver your pre-tests. Okay, now let's move on to talking about managing student accounts. So managing student accounts is the process most often used in WebXam. Now, if you are a new school or making changes at the start of a year, you may be adding administrator accounts or teacher accounts or even assessor accounts for the education portfolio, but you'll be working with secondary students throughout the year. So to see all of your secondary students, you can click on the list option, and all active WebXam accounts will be displayed here. You can choose to filter this list by name. You can either do part of a name. For example, if I start to type in Anthony, this list will filter down to all the Anthonys, and also the Samantha, because this text is included in their first name. You can do first name and last name if you wish, either by first name space last name or last name, comma, space first name. For example, we can type in Madison, comma, Anthony, and you'll see that we've now limited this list down to just this one student. You can also filter based upon the username. For example, if we wanted to limit this result to just this one student, we can do so. The next option is to filter by teacher. Now, in reality, this is either the teacher or the administrator. If you select an administrator, you're going to see students assigned to all teachers that that administrator has access to. And so you'll notice when you pick an administrator and you look at an account, you'll now see that this teacher is underneath this administrator, and that's why the student is showing up in this list. Next option is you can choose to filter this report by SSID. If you know the SSID of the student you need to check on, you can just enter it here, and this list will filter down to just that student. You can also choose to filter by the student's location or by their grade/graduation year. You can also filter by pathway if you wish. For example, we can see all of our agricultural students. And finally, you can filter by tags, which we'll discuss in a little bit more detail in a moment. I just want to take a few seconds to talk about how you might use this WebXam secondary student list to do some end of school year or start of next school year tasks. One of the key things you need to do as the school year rolls over is to move any students to the correct grade level. For example, for all of your seniors, you may wish to archive their accounts. And for all of your underclass people, you may wish to advance them one grade, from freshman to sophomore, from sophomore to junior, and from junior to senior. So let's talk about how you might do that using the secondary student list. Now, the first thing you're going to want to do in this case is to change the show entries option at the bottom to all. And this makes sure that any action you perform is done on all applicable students in your list. So let's say we want to archive our seniors. We'll type in senior, and that will filter this list down to just the seniors, as you can see. You can select all of those seniors by clicking on this plus or this checkbox in the header, or you can select particular students to move. In this case, we can move all of them. And now we're going to use the bulk action. Let's let you perform actions on a group of student accounts, and we're going to archive them. So when we click apply, all of these seniors accounts are going to be archived. So let's do that. And now all of the senior accounts are archived, so they are not showing up in this list anymore. Now, the next thing we might want to do is to take our underclass people and advance them one grade. And you can do this all at once. You can choose your freshmen, your sophomores, juniors, your grade 8 and grade 7 students. And then you can select all of them again and choose the change grade option. So you can move all those students to one particular grade, or you'll notice you can choose to promote them, and that will advance them by one grade level. And so we hit apply. All of these students will be advanced to the next grade level, and you'll be ready for next school year. As you can see, this process may take a minute or two, but it is now done. And so now, once again, we should have seniors in our student list that are not archived. And as you see, so these were the students that were juniors last year, and we now promoted them to be seniors. So there are some other bulk actions available to you. You can add pathways, add tests, remove tests, archive and unarchive students, change their grade as we saw, add a graduation year or change a graduation year. You can add and remove teacher accounts to students from students. You can add and remove tags. You can download a CSV, or you can enable or disable accounts. Now, whenever you're using one of these options, you must select students that you wish that action to apply to. And the one exception to that is the download CSV option. In that case, if you selected no students, you'll get a download of all the students in the list. Let's talk about some of the other options on this report. Firstly, you can choose to show those students' passwords in the list if you wish to. You can also choose to show archived students. And so selecting that will update this list to include archived students. And so now you'll see the status for these students is archived. If you need to unarchive that student, you may check them, choose unarchive, and then apply. And that one student account was successfully unarchived. Let's talk briefly about tags, which you noticed were another option that was available to you in the bulk action choice. So tags allow you to group your students together based on your own criteria. For example, imagine you're an FCS teacher. You have 6 or 7 sections of students in a couple of different subject codes, and you want to be able to group them by what section they're in. And so to do that, we may select a group of students that we're interested in, and we may choose to add a tag. And let's call that tag workshop. You can't have spaces in your tags, and the only requirement is that you try to be a little bit descriptive so that when you go back later, you'll know what those tags mean. And so when I hit apply, these 4 students will have this new tag added to their account. You can see that up here. And now the next time I go back to that list and I click on tags, I'll see workshop students. And I can select that tag and I'll see those 4 students. The other place where you may use tags is in activating tests. When you get to the last step when activating tests, you can choose to limit the list of students by a tag. So for example, if you wanted to make sure that you're activating a test for all of your first period students in global foods, you can add a tag for that, and then in activation, limit that student list to students in that first period class. Okay, well, let's move on to uploading students. Now this year we really worked to improve the documentation on uploading students because last year we implemented an entirely new process for doing this. Let's take a look at that process now. So to upload students, we'll want to go under secondary student and choose upload. And we'll be taken to the upload form. If we need to complete a roster or if we need additional information, you can use this button to get that additional information. And what you'll see here is 4 buttons that may be helpful as you complete your upload form. You can go to the ODE program and assessment matrix, which defines which subject codes belong to which pathways, which subject codes might have been no longer in use, or whatever. You can choose to download a copy of the template, which we'll show you in a second. This button will return you back to the form. And lastly, you can see some documentation. And so selecting that documentation will give you a window with details about the upload process. Now we're going to go through the upload process now so that you can see how it works if you haven't already. And I will say there have been a large number of uploads done both this year and last year, and they have been largely successful. So we really thank you for your work in getting your students uploaded using the roster upload option. So below, you'll see the list of columns that you need to supply in your upload file. You'll see additional data as to whether or not that field is required. This year, we no longer require an EMIS ID to be specified. You'll see a description of that column. You'll see what's new. You'll see possible values. You'll see examples and a second example. So some of the things that have changed recently, as I said, the EMIS ID is no longer required. Starting last year, we only allow you to enter 1 pathway per row. So if you have a student that's in multiple pathways or a student that's with multiple teachers, you can add that student in two rows, and then all that data will be combined into 1 account. Lastly, we talked about tags a little bit earlier. You can include tags in your upload so that you don't have to go back later and add them. So let's take a look at a sample file. So here's an upload file I created. The template includes all the column names as well as these 2 sample rows. You can choose to leave those sample rows in the upload file, or you can choose to remove them, whatever you need to do. So you'll see we've supplied a sample SSID, a name, a building IRN, the student's grade levels, their pathway, and their teacher. Now you'll notice I've left this teacher ID slightly wrong so that we can show you what happens when it's not correct. So you can see our completed roster upload file, and now let's try to upload it. So we can return back to the upload form. We can select our file, and then we select the upload button. And what we'll see immediately is that there's an error. And that relates to the fact that this teacher ID does not exist in our system. We also see there's some information that some of the student data has changed. And that's perfectly fine. This is just because I tested this process earlier and I'm using the same upload file again. Okay, so let's go fix the error that is preventing us from being able to process this upload. If you're unsure how to fix the error, you can choose to send the file to WebXam support, and then we'll work with you to get that information corrected. But in many cases, you can correct that issue yourself. In this case, for example, it's just that I mistyped this teacher ID. This should be a 4. And that's all I need to do to correct that data. So let's save that. And then you just go back and repeat the process of uploading the file again. Select it, upload it. And now, you see we have these informational summaries, but we have no errors. And so now we have the option to process this upload file. So if we select that, that upload is completed as you wait. There's no processing done by WebXam support. It's available to you immediately. If you need it, a copy of a summary of the upload is provided to you. You can copy those results to your clipboard and paste them into another application if you need to. However, those reports are also available to you under upload history. And so we can see our most recent upload, and we can see the report that that upload generated. Now returning to our secondary student list, we can search for our newly added users. And we'll see them here. They're already in the system, they're enabled, they're ready to test right away in this engineering pathway. So that is the upload process. Lastly, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the WebXam hierarchy. And that's not because there's any new features. It's just that it's key to understanding how WebXam determines what data you as a teacher or administrator are allowed to see. Now, editing the hierarchy is complicated. And if you are unsure about the changes you wish to make, or just want to make sure you check with us before you do that, do not hesitate to contact us. So, the WebXam hierarchy is visible to you by clicking on your username and then selecting Manage Users. And what you'll see is, in essence, a tree. And the idea behind this tree is that you can see any data that is to the right of your name. For example, I am this Users Workshop user, and I have access to all the data for all the teachers that are to the left, to the right of me. You'll notice that there's administrators represented by this user icon, and there's teachers represented by this graduation cap. Now, the way to think about this that helps me is to think of this as like a file folder. So each administrator is a folder, perhaps on your computer. Each teacher is a file in that folder. And then the students might be the contents of that file in this analogy. So for example, I know that here's my folder. So I can see everything in this administrator, and for all of these teachers. You can also see who your upper level administrators are if you need to. So if you needed to move somebody, for example, move a teacher to a different administrator, you can simply click on that teacher and drag them to the administrator you want to move them to. And then as a last step, you would save those changes. Now, you cannot move a teacher out of your hierarchy entirely, and you cannot move a teacher into your hierarchy from outside of it. So the limitation there is that when you're rearranging your hierarchy, you're only doing that within the users that you can manage. And again, I just want to stress that this display really determines what information is available to you, either in reporting or in roster screens. The last step after you make any changes is to click the Save Changes button. I'm not going to do that here. I don't want to make that change that I suggested. I just want to make you aware that you must do save changes after you make any adjustments to this hierarchy. So that is the WebXam hierarchy. Let me talk about a few other quick things. You may notice there's an adult student option. And this is if your program includes adult students and you wish to give them WebXam assessments, or based on the nature of the program, you're required to do so, you can add adult students. Now, adult students typically are not needed. And in fact, in this demo data set, I don't even have any adult students. And the main difference between an adult student and a secondary student is that there is no grade level associated with that account. Okay, that completes this section of the WebXam Users Workshop on the WebXam walkthrough. If you have any questions, I'm pleased to answer them now.
Okay, boy, it's nothing like hearing your own voice played back to yourself. If anybody has any questions about how to manage user accounts, we're happy to answer them here. You're also happy to email us. You're welcome to email us at any time at support@webexam.org, or to give us a call at 614-292-4988. So I don't see any questions popping in, but if any do pop in, we will answer them. So we'll move on to the next portion of this workshop. And we're still going to give you a break from my voice, because I think we've all had enough of that, but it'll be coming back. And we're going to talk about test activation with my colleague, Tyler Deegan.
Hi, my name is Tyler, and I'm a web developer with WebXam. Today, I will be walking you through the test activation process. If you'd like to follow along, go to demo.webexam.org and log in with the username users.workshop and the password WebXam in all lowercase. Please note that this demo account will only be active for October 12th, 2021. Before beginning the activation process, first check that all students have been added into the system and that the students' accounts have been enabled by navigating to Secondary Student List and reviewing the roster. Make sure the correct tests and accommodations are assigned to the students by clicking the green plus sign to expand the student's info. If the pathway, test, or accommodation is not listed on the user's account, you can add it by scrolling down and clicking Edit User. If the test is outside of the student's pathway, add the test in the Additional Test box. Ensure that all Individualized Education Program, or IEP, students have an accommodation listed in their student profile. For students who need text-to-speech, ensure that the Reader is Required accommodation is set before test activation, or the student will not receive text-to-speech features. School districts are responsible for properly assigning student accommodations. Tests taken with incorrect settings or missing accommodations will not be allowed to retest. For tests that require a fee, such as pre-tests or employability tests, make sure that tests are ordered for the teachers who need them and that the teachers who are administering the purchased tests have enough credits assigned to activate the tests. To activate the test, click on the Activate Test button in the left navigation bar. This will take you to our activation wizard. First, select the name of the teacher to whom the student or students belong in the dropdown and click Next. Then, select the district or career center that owns the program that you are testing for. This will auto-populate with the teacher's selected district or career center as it is listed in their account profile. Please select the appropriate district or career center if it is different from the teacher's profile. If you have questions about this, please contact your local testing coordinator or WebXam support. Once you have selected the correct district or career center, click Next. Select whether you are administering a pre, post, or practice test and click Next. If there are any saved tests that you need to reactivate, that button will appear here as well. Select the pathway that you are testing and click Next. Select the course that you are testing and click Next. Select each student you wish to activate for this test by checking the checkbox next to their name. If the student requires accommodations, double check that the appropriate accommodations are displayed for the student. A red flag will appear for students requiring extended time, and a blue flag will appear for students requiring a reader. Other accommodations are captured by the red flag as well. If you do not see a student that you expect to be in a list of activatable students, there are a few things to check in your secondary students roster in WebXam. Make sure that the student's account is enabled. Make sure that the test is assigned to the student's account. Make sure that the student has not already started testing for this test in a previous session by checking the Saved Test option earlier in the activation wizard. The activation window will always last for 1 hour after the designated start time. By default, the activation window will begin immediately, but you can specify a later start time up to 7 days in advance by using this Activation Start Time panel. To see the Activation Start Time panel, click the Activation Start Time link. If a student does not begin testing during the activation window, the student can be reactivated for a new session at a later time. To finalize the activation, click the Activation button in the bottom right. The checked students are now ready to take their test in the activation time window listed. If any adjustments need to be made, a student can always be unactivated for the test by checking the student again and clicking Unactivate. To obtain logins for the students who are testing, click the Download Activated CSV button that appears after you've activated the student. You can also obtain a student's password in the secondary student list by pressing the Show Passwords button above the list of students, or by running the activations report in the sidebar under the report section. We will now cover some common activation issues. If a student's test is closed before they complete it, but they are still within the initial activation window, the student is able to re-enter the test by following the same instructions they used to start the test. If a student's test is closed before they complete it and they are outside the initial activation window, a teacher or administrator will need to reactivate the test by going through the activation wizard and selecting Saved Test as the test type. In case of emergency, the student's responses are saved as they progress through the test, so no progress will be lost if the test is suddenly closed. As stated earlier, if resuming the test within the initial activation window, the student can simply resume the test by following the steps they took to start the test. If resuming the test outside the initial activation window, the test will need to be reactivated by a teacher or administrator before the student can resume the test. Please note that the time remaining in the test will not change if the test is reactivated. If a student's test is closed with 20 minutes remaining, when they resume the test, the student will still only have 20 minutes left on the test. The activation window only refers to the time window in which the student can begin or resume their testing session. Please also note that all of this advice only applies to tests that are closed early and not to tests that are submitted early. If a student accidentally submits a test for scoring before they are finished for the test, ODE must approve of the test submission reset. The WebXam reset form can be found on the ODE CTE assessment system page and is linked to in our WebXam documentation.
Okay, so that is the test activation process. We do like to go over that, and in particular, the importance of why a student might not be showing up in the activation list. And again, as Tyler mentioned, that could be because the student's accounts are disabled, or because the test isn't on their account. It could be because they've already taken the test. So just keep an eye out for those sort of common activation issues as you go through the activation process. So I saw there was a question in the chat about are there plans to make tags part of the upload process in the future? So the good news is that the tags are included in the upload process. I didn't cover it much in my presentation, so I apologize for that. But the last column in the upload file can be used for user tags. And you can supply one or many user tags separated by a semicolon in that column if you need to. And you'll see, I think you'll see sometimes there's like additional data at the end of a of a roster upload file. Sometimes that data will get added as a user tag, just because it's at the end of the file where that column would expect it to be. So you may wish to check the tags that are available in your system and just make sure that they're all the ones that you expect to see.
One thing that I would recommend adding too when you're doing the tags is thinking specifically about how you're trying to group your students. Oftentimes when people start using tagging, they might do a very generic name for a group of students, specifying like a class name. But since you frequently might be doing multiple uploads of students from semester to semester, you might want to specify something a little bit more specific, like the actual time period in the tag, so that you can distinguish the next semester exactly which students you're grouping together. That's something I wanted to add that was a little bit different in the video. It showed a more generic name, and you might want to be more specific when you are tagging groups of students.
Thank you, Brock. So now we're back to hearing me talk again for an extended period of time, this time about WebXam Reports. We're going to be going through every report available in the WebXam system. So anyway, just get yourself a drink of water, get comfortable, and enjoy.
Hello, my name is Richard Huggins, and I'm pleased to be talking to you today about WebXam Reports. Now, this presentation is going to take a little while, so you're welcome to either sit back, relax, and enjoy the show, or if you wish, you can follow along with what I'm doing by going to the following website, demo.webexam.org. And you can log in there with a username of users.workshop and a password of WebXam. Now, this option to follow along will only be available at the WebXam Users Workshop on October 12th of 2021. So if you're watching this recording later, please sit back and enjoy. So I'll give you a second to get logged in if you wish to. And again, it's not necessary. You're welcome to watch and enjoy. But if you wish to follow along, you can do that as well. Okay, let's get going. So the WebXam reports we're going to be covering today are the summary report, the testing report, pathways, outcomes, teacher effectiveness, and activations. We're going to go through these reports one by one. And as we do, we're going to discuss when to use the report, what the various filtering options mean, and perhaps some tips and tricks. Now, if you have questions or comments, you're welcome, if you're watching this as part of the user workshop, to submit those questions in the chat at the end of the section. Or if you're watching a recording or have a question later on, you're welcome to contact WebXam support at support@webexam.org or 614-292-4988. So let's get started, shall we, by looking at the summary report. Now, the summary report is generally used to confirm that testing has occurred. Administrators and district testing coordinators may also use it to confirm and correct the reporting location. And you can also use the summary report to access the testing report for a specific set of students. Let's take a look. So I'm now logged into WebXam using that users.workshop account. And if I want to access the reports, I simply select the reports navigation item and then the report I wish to use. In this case, I'm selecting summary. Now, the summary report has two options, the month and the year. And the first thing to know is that if you make no choices, no changes to those filters, and just run the report, you'll see all testing that has occurred for teachers that you know about, that you control, that you manage in the current school year. Now, since I ran this for the current school year, you'll notice that there's only pre-testing testing available. And you can tell it's a pre-test because the PRE suffix on the subject code is present. So you're seeing the test ID, the name of that test, the teacher that gave the test, the reporting location, which we'll discuss in a little bit more detail later, the number of students that took the test, and the number that passed. So for pre-tests and field tests, that number passed will be NA, because there are not performance standards for those tests. So let's talk generally about WebXam reports. In many reports, the columns are sortable. And you can see that if you see this little sorting icon. And then if you click anywhere in that column, header, it will sort that row. It will sort based on that row. So you notice I've clicked on name, and now it's sorted these results by that name column alphabetically. If I click the name column again, it will sort them reverse alphabetically. Lastly, there is a search option here. Now this is going to search all of the visible data and limit the rows to the ones that match that search. So if we choose a particular student teacher's name, you'll notice as we type, the list is filtering automatically. And so we started to type in the last name of Madison, and now we've limited these results to the teacher Porter Madison. Finally, there are export options available in most WebXam reports. Typically, there are 4 options. There's the copy option, which places the data into your clipboard so that you can paste it into any other program. There's an Excel specific option, which we'll look at in a second. There's a comma separated value option if you're going to be importing this data into some other programs or websites. And there's a PDF option if you just want to maintain a record of this report. Now, when you choose to export, that export is going to honor any searches that you have done against that data. So if we exported this data right now, we would only have these 4 rows in the export. Let's do that. So here I've selected the Excel export, and Excel has opened up. And we can see that we have those 4 rows in the same columns that we saw in the report itself. Okay, back to the summary report. If we remove that search option, all of the rows are added back in. And we can see all of the reporting that has occurred, or all the testing that has occurred in our district. You can choose to show a different number of results if you wish to. Currently, it's showing 25, but you can show up to 100. Now, this number of results shown does not affect the export. Regardless of how many rows you are showing, all rows that match your search criteria will be included in the export. Now, I mentioned earlier that there are 2 filter options for a month and a year. The month option lets you limit your report to testing that has occurred in a particular month, and the year lets you choose a different school year if necessary. So if I change this month to August and run this report again, you'll notice that there's only 1 result, because this is the only testing that occurred amongst my teachers in this current school year in August. Now, as I said, you can choose to look at past years. You can go to last year, and we'll change this month back to all and run this report again. And now we'll see all testing that had occurred last year. And that will include post tests, because it doesn't have that little pre suffix, and the pre-tests. Finally, let's talk about the reporting location. So for district testing coordinators and administrators, you may wish to check the reporting location to ensure it is correct. Teachers and administrators make this choice during the test activation process. In the second stage, they are asked what district or career center owns the test results associated with this program. And this reporting location determines where, at the end of the year, these results will be sent so that they can ultimately be reported. So making sure this reporting location is correct is essential to a smooth workflow. And you'll notice next to that reporting location is a number of students. And you'll notice that that's a hyperlink. And what that hyperlink will do is execute a testing report based on the data in this row. So when we select this, we'll execute a testing report, and we'll have the 10 results associated with that row of data. We'll look more at the testing report in just a few seconds. For now, that concludes our look at the summary report. So let's move on to the testing report. Now, the testing report obviously allows you to access scoring information on tests, but it also allows you to check statewide averages and to confirm tests have been taken in previous years if necessary. So let's dive into the testing report now. So to access the testing report, I'm once again going to click on that reports navigation item and then select testing. Now, as you'll notice, there's a number of additional filtering options for this report. So let's go through those one by one. The first option is the location. Now, the location is going to be based on either the student's location as shown in the secondary student list page or on the reporting location. So if you select a particular school, you're going to see all students who are located at that school that may have taken the particular test you're interested in, or students whose results are being reported to the district that that school is a part of. For this demonstration, I'm going to leave that at show all locations. And in fact, for me, it's pretty rare that I'm changing that location option. The next filter is for the teacher. That's really either the teacher or the administrator. So if you're wishing to choose an administrator, you'll see all of the teacher's results that are underneath that administrator. And if you select a teacher, you'll see only that teacher's results. Now, when I say only that teacher's results, that really means two things. It means that you're going to see tests given by that teacher that match the other criteria, or you're going to see tests students that are assigned to that teacher have taken in the past that align with this other criteria. So that's essential. So if you want to see if a student that is now one of your students has taken this test in the past, you'll see it in your results so that you can use that information as part of your instruction. So in this case, let's just leave this on this Agriculture, Food, and Natural Resources test, AFNR, but we can also choose a pretest. You'll notice all the pretests are listed. Then there are two additional options. You can choose to run this report on all post-tests that were given that match your other criteria. You can also do the same for pretests. As I said, for this part of the demonstration, we'll leave that set on the AFNR course. The next filtering option is the grade level. Now this is looking and will filter the results based on the student's grade level at the time they took the test. Now, because that data has to be updated every year in WebXam, it may not always be accurate. For example, you might have a senior, but their grade level wasn't updated in WebXam at the time they took this assessment. So they're still, in the context of the report, a junior. So as a result of that complication, we discourage the use of the grade level filter unless absolutely necessary. but the graduation year option can be much more useful. This lets you limit your results to students in a particular graduation cohort. Now, the graduation year has been required for a few years, so most, if not all, of your students should have graduation year data associated with their accounts now. However, if you're digging into past results several years ago, students may not have this graduation year data associated with their accounts, so the filter may not work as expected. For this purpose, I'm going to choose last year. So we're looking basically at last year's seniors. And then for the next reporting option, we can choose during school year. So this will limit the results to students that meet the other criteria and that tested in the given year. One of the options is all years. And so this will limit the results to all tests that were taken by students in the selected graduation year, regardless of when those results regardless of when those tests were taken. Finally, there's an exclude archive filter. So by default, all results will be shown in the report, even if those students have since been archived. And in most cases, that's perfectly fine. However, in some cases, maybe where you're looking into past results, but you want to limit those results to students that are currently active in WebXam, you can change this to yes. Now there's an additional option for report identifier. This isn't a filter so much as it controls what information is displayed in the report. You can choose to either show the name of the student or the student's SSID. We do encourage you, if you select the SSID, to not share that information via any insecure means, such as email or paper. For the purposes of this demonstration, we're going to use the name. And so let's run this report. Now, typically in WebXam, your results will come back. Sometimes they'll take a little longer, but you will get results. And what you're seeing based on these filters is all the students under my account that have taken this AFNR test who were seniors last year, and it's regardless of when they took that test. And so you'll notice this testing date includes different school years. Let's take a look at this fourth row, which looks a little bit different from the other rows. So as you know, in SY 2020 and SY 2021, as a result of the pandemic, WebXam accepted uploads and entry of course grades. This row represents such a course grade. And what sort of gives you a sense of which rows are course grades and which rows are WebXam assessments are the following differences. First off, the test date for a course grade will be only a year, and it will be the school year. Secondly, the correct and questions columns will be blank. And then finally, in the percent correct column, instead of a percent correct, you'll have a WebXam performance level. Either A for advanced, as in this case, P for proficient, or N for not proficient. Now, if you mouse over that A, you'll see the percent score that would be used for calculating a pathway score for this student in their assigned pathways. Now, as with the other WebXam reports, you'll notice you can do filtering based on these various columns, you can do sorting based on the various columns. You can do filtering as necessary if you choose to limit this to a particular student. And you'll also notice there's one post-run option to show additional details. Now, show additional details when selected in the testing report, we'll add the teacher name and the location to the output. And if you chose to export this data, it would include those additional columns. For now, we'll leave that unselected. If we go to the bottom of the report, We'll notice once again that you can choose to navigate amongst the pages, or you can choose to show more or less results on each page. Finally, there's the aggregate report section. In all cases, you'll have a this report row, which gives you aggregate data on all the students in this report. And that will include the tests taken, the average percent score, the number of students that were proficient and advanced, and the number of students that were proficient or advanced. But if you wanted to include statewide data, all you have to do is make sure you're selecting a particular year. So if we change this to look at last school year, and we run this report again, we'll see a smaller number of students, but now we'll have statewide data. And this just gives you a comparison of your program to other programs around the state. Finally, in the testing and pathway reports, you can use this plus to see a student's entire testing history in WebXam. And so what you'll see is every test that student has taken, as well as pathway scores for any pathways that are assigned to that student's account. And you'll notice this used column indicates which tests are used in calculating which pathway scores. And so you'll notice, for example, that this student has 2 rows for the AFNR test. One of those rows is being used for this agricultural pathway, and the other one is not. And that is because this course grade is more advantageous to the student than the WebXam assessment. Looking at the pathway rows, you'll see that we list whether or not the student is passing in the pathway or proficient and advanced, as well as the number of tests the student has taken in that pathway. So this student has taken 2 tests in that pathway, and based on those 2 tests, they're currently proficient and advanced. In this agricultural pathway, the student is currently passing or proficient and has taken 1 test. Let's take a look at a different test. And this time we're going to look at the education principles test. Now we're going to change this to not have a graduation year specified, and we're going to run this report. Now, because the education principles test subject code includes a portfolio option, you'll notice the testing report looks slightly different. And that is because we're including additional information about the portfolio so that you can make sure your students are receiving a score. Now, what you'll notice is that for students that took the WebXam assessment but did not complete the portfolio, they do not have a score. Now, obviously for the last 2 years, because of the pandemic, we have these course grades, and that course grade encompasses both an assessment and a portfolio score. So the student did get reported, but if there hadn't been a course grade option available, they would have had to complete a portfolio. This column is essential because it tells you whether or not additional assessors are needed to complete the portfolio scoring process. And if you mouse over this column, you'll see the assessors that have assessed the student's portfolio. So if this is red and says yes, then you must find an additional assessor. Typically, portfolios required at least 2 assessors, and if their scores differ significantly, a 3rd assessor may be required. When using the education principles test, the show additional details selection includes additional rows. Specifically, it's going to include scoring data on the test, as well as scoring data on the portfolio itself. This data is then combined to generate this composite score, which is ultimately reported. Lastly, you'll notice that for this education principles test, there's a print certificates option that wasn't available for that AFNR test. The print certificates option will show for any test that's a C tag. And the education principles is one such test. And those certificates can be used as a last resort way of reporting a student's results such that they get college credit at their higher education institution. If all other means of confirming the student has completed this WebXam assessment are not working, there is an option as part of a process to submit a WebXam certificate. I do want to point out once again that that print certificates option is not available for all tests. It's only available for tests that have C tags. Lastly, if we change this back to all years and run this report again, we'll see all testing that has occurred in education principles for all current students. You'll notice in the aggregate report, we now have aggregate data for this report, but not statewide. So that concludes our look at the testing report. Let's move on to the pathway report. Now, the pathway report lets you access pathway scoring information and also gives you an opportunity to check for retake eligibility. Now, I will say with respect to retake eligibility, currently the pathway report does not look to determine same year test retake availability. It only looks to see if a student has taken the test in the current year. That's a feature that we'll be adding very soon. So let's look at the pathway report. Again, in WebXam, under the reports navigation item, we can select pathway. Now, immediately you'll notice this little warning indicator. And this is telling you that ultimately, what is reported into EMIS is what determines whether or not a student has passed a pathway, both for the purpose of graduation and for your report cards. This WebXam data is provided to help guide your decisions related to your students, but ultimately the EMIS data is authoritative. And so you'll notice that some of the options, the location, grade, graduation year, and tested during, as well as exclude archive and report identify, are the same as they were for the testing report. But there are some differences. First off, the test select filter lets you select a particular pathway. Now, starting this year, you can select multiple pathways in this report. So let's do that. Let's select some of the IT pathways. So I selected 3 pathways, the N0, N1, and N2 pathways. I'm not going to select a grade level because, as with the testing report, the grade can be a little touchy, and you should only use it if absolutely necessary. I am going to choose a graduation year. We'll again look at last year's seniors. And I'm going to select students that tested last year as well. So this filter for tests required in program is new this year. And this lets you determine whether or not to see pathway scores at what level of tests. So you can choose between 2 tests, 3 tests, and 4 tests. So typically 3 tests are required to complete a WebXam pathway. But oftentimes, in most cases, there are actually 4 courses in a program. And so you choosing 4 can give you a way to make sure your students have taken all the tests that they need to take. We'll leave these other options alone and run this report. Now, the more expansive a report is, the longer it may take to generate results. So just be advised, in some cases, you may have to wait a few seconds for results to appear. Now, immediately, what you'll notice is that for each student and pathway, you'll see a pathway row, followed by all the students testing in that pathway. In this case, the student has 2 rows for the same course. One is a WebXam assessment, and the other is the course grade. And you'll notice there's a check mark next to the WebXam assessment because that score is being used in their pathway score calculation. And that is because it is more advantageous to the student with a 75% than this course grade, which would be lower. And so you'll notice, because we selected multiple pathways above, we have these N1 students, we have an N2 student, and we have an N0 student. Now, if you had a student that was in multiple pathways that were part of your report, you would see that student listed multiple times in this report. Now, as with the other WebXam reports, you can choose to filter these options. For example, we wanted to limit this down to this particular student. But notice for the pathway report, you cannot sort these columns. And that's just because the order of the columns is important to understanding the report as a whole, so we don't allow sorting. Finally, you'll notice there are a few additional post-run report options. The first one is to show pathway rows only. Selecting this option will limit the results only to the rows that list their pathway score. And now you can really see which students have not yet completed 4 tests in that program. You can also see which students have completed 4 tests in the program. The other option is to show additional details. Now, in the case of the pathway report, all that adds is the teacher name. Now, as with other WebXam reports, you can use these export options. And then finally, there is an aggregate report available. Now, by default, the aggregate report is only going to show the current reporting data. But if you wish to see statewide data for a pathway, you just need to have limited yourself to 1 pathway and to have chosen a particular year that student is tested during. And so if we run this report now, we'll see that this report includes 1 student that has not taken enough tests to have a pathway score. And then you'll see statewide data as well. Lastly, for the pathway report, you'll notice you'll always have the option to print certificates. One point I want to make is that the pathway report does not include FCS. FCS is not a career technical pathway, but you can find FCS testing in your testing report. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about in the pathway report is being able to check for retakes. So if you change this to all years and run this report, you'll now see what students are eligible to retake a test. And that is indicated by this little circular icon. And it tells you that this test can be retaken in the current year. Now, as I said earlier, this indicator does not include the same year retake option that was added last year. That feature will be coming soon. Okay, so that concludes our look at the pathway report. Now we're ready to look at the outcome report. Now the outcome report lets you see aggregate data on ODE career technical standard outcomes for a particular test, or you can disaggregate that data and see it at student level. So let's take a look at what that means. Again, in the reports navigation item, I'm selecting outcome. Now there are currently 4 filters that we have seen before: the location, the teacher or administrator, the test, and the year. However, recently an additional option was added to let you limit the results by graduation cohort. For this result, let's just look at, say, ground transportation. and we run this report for last year. Now, what we're seeing are the outcomes in the current ground transportation career technical content standards. Please know that those career technical content standards for ground and air transportation are under revision. They are currently being finalized. And this year, web examiner seat will be writing new assessments based on the new ground transportation standards. So if you have a ground transportation program, please do whatever you can to help you or your teachers participate in that process. For now, we're looking at the current standards, and we'll immediately be able to see that on each standard, we'll see the code, 1.1, the outcome text, how your students did on that test, and how students statewide did. So in this case, we can see that our students did a little bit better than students statewide. Using the green plus lets you see for each student how they did on that outcome. But if you wanted to disaggregate this data completely, you can select the Show Student Details Post-Run Report option. So selecting that, again, it disaggregates all of the data. So for each student, we're going to see each outcome on that test and how they did. And you can see this gets pretty detailed. So it's typical that you would be maybe exporting that into another program to use to guide your instruction. Now, when this outcome report is of particular use is for a pretest. So let's look at this same course, but we'll look at the pretest. So the nice thing about the pretest option using the outcome report is it really gives you a chance to figure out where you might need some additional lessons. So if we look at this report, we might notice that our students did not do particularly well in outcome 4.6 batteries. And now students didn't do well statewide, which makes sense. The student may not have seen this content yet. So it's not surprising if they didn't do well on the pretest. But you may notice that you want to add an additional unit about batteries or an additional lesson about batteries to ensure your students maximize their performance on the end of course assessments. So that is the purpose of the outcome report. Let's move on to the teacher effectiveness report. So the teacher effectiveness report is used for schools that are using WebXam pretests. It lets you access teacher effectiveness rating data for use as high quality data in OTES 2.0. You can also use a teacher effectiveness report to confirm that WebXam post-tests have been given to maximize your investment in pretesting. So let's head back to WebXam and see what that looks like. So I'm in WebXam under the reports navigation item, and I'm selecting teacher effectiveness. I'm going to choose last year, and I'm going to run this report. And so what you're seeing is a row for each teacher in your school. We're seeing how many tests they gave, what the average percent score on the pretest was, what the average percent score on the post-test was, and an average of what that gain is. That's sort of a rounded version. Lastly, there's a level based on a survey that was done a few years ago that determines if it's based on the gain. And so based on various gain scores, teachers make it a most effective, above average, approaching average, average, and least effective. But a gain of 8 is considered most effective. And if we expand this data, we'll see this disaggregated. So we'll see for each test what the teacher's gain was, and then we'll also see that data for every student that took that test. Typically, for reporting purposes, you're reporting this entire gain score. As I said earlier, the teacher effectiveness report has a second option for ensuring that you're maximizing your pre-testing investment. So this is the first sub-report. And then below, there's a second compliance report. Now, I know the word compliance has many meanings. I just want to make you aware that this data is not reported to ODE. It is simply here for your convenience to ensure you're maximizing your pre-testing investment. And what you're really wanting to make sure of, and you want to do this particularly later in the school year, is to ensure that post-tests have been given for matching pre-tests. Now, it's perfectly normal for these numbers not to be equal. Students may have left the program or left the district or any number of other reasons. And if you want to see why there's a slightly different number here, you can use this expansion option to see that there were 3 students who did not take this post-test. And again, the fact they didn't take the post-test likely means that they left the program or left the district. You'll notice this teacher has a much different situation. They've given 75 pre-tests, but only 9 matching post-tests. So their gain scores are only going to be based on those 9 students. And the reason for that is that this teacher gave the post-tests after the teacher effectiveness window closed. Now, every year, the pre-testing teacher effectiveness window closes a little bit earlier than the rest of post-testing. And that is so that you have time to collate that data together for reporting into OTES. So what you'll notice is that typically it's mid to late April. I think this year is April 23rd that the post-test must be given by in order to be included in the teacher effectiveness report. This teacher gave those post-tests after that date. As a result, you don't have a great deal of teacher effectiveness data available to you. And that's, again, that happens. We are simply providing this information so that you can make sure that you're maximizing the value of the pretest that you gave for the purpose of evaluation. Okay, so that concludes our look at the teacher effectiveness report. The next report we're going to look at is the activation report. Now, the activation report is different from all the other reports in that you're not going to be seeing any test results. You're going to be seeing upcoming or current activations. So let's take a look. Now, activations can be scheduled up to 7 days in advance, and it might be necessary for you to confirm that those activations have been scheduled. If so, you can just click the Run Report button without making any choices, and you'll see all upcoming or current activations in your district. For example, we see that teacher Emma Alglaze has activated this test for 2 students to start later today at 3 o'clock. And if we click on this green plus, we'll see who those 2 students are, and we'll also see their usernames and passwords in case you need that information to help them get signed in. You can also select a specific date and time if you want to see testing that's going to be occurring at that time. But most cases, you're going to be leaving that blank and just choosing Run Report. So before we move on to the next section of the user workshop, I did want to briefly mention that reporting is also available in the secondary student list page. So for any student, you can click the green plus, and along with seeing all of their metadata, you'll also see their testing results, both the test results and their any pathway scoring information that's available. This is ultimately the exact same report that's run when you click a green plus in the testing or pathway reports. It's just displayed slightly differently here. Just be aware if you ever need to check the results for a particular student, you can do so from the student list page as well as from the reports section. Okay, that concludes our discussion on the WebXam reports. Please put any questions you have in the chat, and we'll be happy to answer them as best we can. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for sticking it out through that presentation on WebXam reporting. I hope it was, if not the most exciting thing in the world, perhaps perhaps at least a little bit useful. I did see one question in the chat, which is, are we able to see tags in a report that is exported to Excel? And the answer to that currently is no. The tags are available only in student list pages and in test activation. And then they can also be added via the uploads option. They're not currently available in the reports. I think we're looking at doing that. So I'd expect that to happen at some point in the future, that the tags will be available in reporting. And if there are any other questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll be happy to work through them. For now, that sort of concludes all of the information we wanted to present to you in the users workshop. Just a few last minute notes and highlights that we want you to be aware of. The first, as always, is to please keep an eye on the WebXam testing calendar. And you can find that at news.webexam.org/calendar. You can find that when you log into WebXam, and you can find it on the ODE Career Technical Assessment System page. Secondly, again, post-testing, practice testing, and field testing are all open starting yesterday. And those will be open for most post-tests until June 3rd, and for field tests and teacher effectiveness related post-testing, that's open until April 22nd. And I apologize, I said April 23rd in that recording, but it is April 22nd. We are recruiting for transportation systems, both ground and air. So if your schools have any of those programs, please do whatever you can to help you or your teachers make time to help us write items for those tests. And to help with that, the item writing for transportation is mostly online this year. So you don't need to find substitutes for your teachers for a full day. We're trying to make that as easy as possible for you and your schools. And as always, if you have any questions after this session or at any time, please feel free to email us, support@webexam.org, or you can call us at 614-292-4988. Those phone lines tend to be open as much as possible from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And so that concludes all of the information that we have to talk about with you today. And if you have any questions, we're happy to help. Otherwise, have a wonderful rest of your day.